Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of the Middle Grade Ninja Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Kent, and I've got good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is I've got two new books available. The first of which is Rob Worm's Bird Adventure. I wrote the first draft of Rob's story when I was 11 years old and in the fifth grade. That version is included with the new edition, complete with full illustrations by 11-year-old me. I have been rethinking and rewriting that story ever since through many, many different variations. At one point, it was a template for the Banneker Bones trilogy. It has been through a lot of changes, but I'm most excited about this version that's available to you now. Rob is an adventure seeking worm. He burrows to the surface with his bunch on a rainy spring morning just to be swooped up by a passing robin. She carries him way up into the sky, but not to worry, he wriggles free, only to land on the roof of a human house. How's he going to get down? And if he does, he's surrounded by nasty yellow jackets, a sizzling hot driveway, colonies of warring ants, a giant spider. There's a whole pond full of worm-hungry koi. When you're a worm, almost everything in your average human backyard is out to eat you, so Rob's got his work cut out for him. It's an exciting, action-packed story that I also think is a little bit funny. I hope that you'll check that out. My other novel is Goodbye to Grandma, and that one is about sixth grader Haley Smith, who comes of age by coming to terms with the death of her grandmother. It is my most personal story. When I was in the sixth grade, my grandmother died, and I was unable to cry at her funeral. It took me a very long time to process my grief, and since I'm publishing this book now, some would say I'm still processing it. I hope that you'll check out both of those books. I hope you'll enjoy them. I hope that you'll feel compelled to write a review, help me promote them in any way that you can. That would mean the world to me. So that's the good news. Two new books available for you right now. The less good news is that my personal circumstances have changed in such a way that I am not going to be able to continue hosting the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. It has been one of the great thrills of my life to have chatted with so many amazing guests. I can't believe the people I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk with. I have learned so much about writing, publishing, life, and I hope you've learned some things as well. I hope the show has been helpful to you, esteemed audience. I couldn't have done it without you, and I so appreciate your support through the years as we've done this. I don't know if or when I'll be able to come back to the show. It's my hope that someday that I will. But in the meantime, I want to offer my most sincere thank you to you and to everyone who has been a part of this show and just the incredible experience it's been. We're going to go up to episode 212, and then after that, there will not be any additional episodes for at least a while. But stay subscribed to the feed. Hopefully at some point I'll be able to come back to you. If not to host a regular podcast, I'll at least have some updates for you about some other things I may be working on. Also keep an eye on middlegradeninja.com. Every week I end the show with God willing I'm alive. I'll see you next week. But today I'll just say, God willing I'm alive. I hope to see you soon. I couldn't be more excited. My guest tonight on February 21st of 2023, the night of right before my PSVR 2 is scheduled to arrival. What an exciting night. I have the incredible good fortune to be talking with Anthony Peckham. Tony, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be in such esteemed company.
Well, I appreciate that. Esteemed audience is here every week, and they have the pleasure of hearing some of the world's best authors, and tonight will be no different. I couldn't be more in love with Children of the Black Glass. It's dark, it's grim, it's action-packed, and very exciting. But esteemed audience knows that I never torture my guests by making them sit through me summarizing either their book or their biography. Why would I do that when you're right here and could do a better job of it than me? So a good place to start is if you would give esteemed audience an overview of your background, and we'll go from there.
Well, my background is, there's lots of it because I'm old. I was born and grew up in South Africa during the apartheid years when there was no TV in our country. And movies came very infrequently and were a huge occasion. And so all we could do was read. And we read all the time. In addition, my dad was a great storyteller, and he used to come home after seeing Alfred Hitchcock movies or a movie called Wages of Fear, and then retell the whole story to all of us. Much to, it was work for him, it was pleasure for us, but I sort of learned to tell stories from him. And so I grew up always wanting to write. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And then one day in high school, I found out that people wrote movies. Didn't know that. I thought movies just grew like mushrooms. And once I found out that people wrote movies, because I loved film, I just said, I want to do that. And I ended up at film school. I went to the University of Cape Town in South Africa and studied English and classical history, and worked with J.M. Coetzee, who's I think he's won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he was my thesis advisor. So I was very lucky to come up against and made my way to America, like many other people, and went to graduate school for film, learned how to write movies, learned how to watch movies, looked at films that I'd never been able to see before, which is one of the great pleasures of film school. And then sold a screenplay while I was still a student to one of my professors who wanted to start a movie company. And he liked what I was writing in his class. And I managed to get an agent out of that. And kind of that was the bottom rung of the bottom ladder of an industry that is full of ladders. And I started climbing the ladder. And I've been writing movies for a long time. I'm still doing it right now. And Children of the Black Glass is my first novel, which I thoroughly love writing. So that's the short answer. I have children, I surf, I grow things. I don't just sit in a chair all day. But that's me. Very happy and very, very lucky to be here.
Well, as somebody who wants to read more novels, as soon as we can get our hands on them, I want you to sit in the chair more.
I'm doing that right now, far too much. But I don't know about you, but I find that I have to exercise, but I have to move my body. Otherwise I can't sustain writing every day. I have to stay and get the blood out of my posterior, as they say, just to move it around. And a lot of the writers I know have to do that as well. So
When I was younger, I had the very foolish notion that my mind was what mattered. That's what created the stories. So I ignored my body much of the time and focused on the mind. And of course, once I started exercising regularly and got a routine, I'm like, oh, look how much clearer I think.
yes,
Look how much easier the writing is now that I've taken care of the physical aspect of things.
exactly. And now they're discovering more and more that there's a direct connection between your big muscles and your brain. And so not using them, like you said, is actually doing your mental work a disservice. So anyway, that's my excuse for surfing anyway. That's
Well, I
good for
frequently find that while exercising, I'm listening to podcasts, which I assume is what people are doing as they exercise while they're listening to us.
yeah.
But I will find that after a good workout in the morning, I will have inspiration somewhere in the middle there. Something about moving around will jostle some ideas loose in my mind. Do you find that to be true?
Absolutely. And that's why I move around with at least a 3x5 card and a pencil, wherever I go. But usually it's a pad and a pen because, those sometimes whole sentences just pop into your head, and you think you'll remember them, but you don't. And then they drive you nuts for 6 months trying to remember them. So whenever I'm exercising, I also have writing tools.
What kind of tools do you have on you when you're surfing?
Now that I pay it. There, if you're not paying attention to the ocean, you get into trouble. So that's my respite. But driving to and from surfing, I have tools. Or once I'm on the beach, I have tools. I always have tools. Even if it's sending myself a text, I've just learned, thinking you'll remember those things. If they're huge, big enough, maybe, but otherwise, no, I write them down because then more come. You're not blocking yourself by trying to remember something. It's down, you've got it, and then the flow continues. So, I'm sure you're the same. And I know almost everyone else is the same. People say, when do you write? And the answer is all the time. Doesn't matter where you are. It's 24/7. You write in your sleep. I dream, when I'm deep in something, I dream solutions or changes I want to make. So I have a red light, little flashlight next to my bed with a pad and a pen. Actually a pencil, because you can write upside down with a pencil. So you don't have to actually get up. You can just pull things and then write them down with the flashlight in your mouth. And the red light doesn't wake you up too much. So we write all the time. That's why we're heroic, I think. So yeah, that's the writer's life.
So I'm curious, having not being able to watch film or television from a young age, and having your father explain stories. And I'm reminded when I was young, my father was hard of hearing, is hard of hearing, prior to closed captioning being widely available. And so we would watch a movie and my mom would pause it every 30, 45 seconds and catch him up on the dialogue. And that way it became clear to me, these aren't just images, these mean something. And I began to piece together the story that way. But I'm curious, what's the first movie you remember seeing, and what's the first film you fell in love with that made you think, I want to do that?
The first movie I remember seeing is really vivid because it terrified me, and that was the old Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. The flying monkeys, they were terrifying. And and we all went, you used to dress to go to the movies, and we all dressed up and went to see Wizard of Oz. And I was hooked from then. I was already into the industry when those movies of the 80s and 90s came out. Aliens, Die Hard, Road Warrior, all of those films came out then, and they just blew my mind. They still do. I still love them. I still watch them. They to me, they were like the perfect melding of visual and verbal and storytelling. And that was an amazing group of directors who's still directing today. So I just love them. I'd watch a snail crawl. If you took a movie of it, I'd watch a snail crawling across a pane of glass. If it moves, if it moves, I love it. So, and that's still true.
And I know you've got an impressive resume with your with your film credits. Like, you wrote Sherlock Holmes, the Robert Downey Jr. version,
Yeah.
Invictus, I never say it right.
Invictus.
Invictus,
Yes.
incredible film. And then you've got one coming up that I'm just fascinated by. The President is Missing.
Well, no, that's no longer coming up. That got, basically COVID killed that. We were making the pilot on March 13th of 2020, when the entire world shut down. We stopped production, got on airplanes, and all went home, taking the virus with us, I'm sure. So that never recovered from COVID. Actors moved on, Um, and so it was a wonderful experience. And one of the tragedies, of my career is that we never got to put that out, because we had a killer first season lined up, and it never happened. And that happens more often than you'd think in the movie industry for one reason or another.
Deeply disappointed. I was looking at the IMDb page and the cast that you had lined up. I thought that's going to be incredible. Christopher McQuarrie is involved. He
Yeah.
doesn't do bad things. Did you get? I guess I know that's adapted from the James Patterson, Bill Clinton novel.
Yeah. Yes.
And I wanted to ask: did you have any chance while you were working on the screenplay? Did you have any chance to interact with them?
Oh yes, a lot. They're producers on the show. They were producers on the show. So I went to President Clinton's offices in Harlem and had to go and pitch what we were doing to him. And I had many questions for him. I got a lot of help from his staff. Um, Jim Patterson was incredibly generous and helpful, because if there's anyone who knows how to write a hook, he does. And, to get you to turn the next page. And so, yeah, it was an amazing experience. We shot it in Baltimore, which is one of my favorite East Coast cities. I really enjoyed it. And I've made lasting friends from that production. Actually, I'm just finishing up a script now for David Oyelowo, who was our lead. And that will hopefully go into production. The movie business, just because you write it doesn't mean it's going to be a movie. In fact, I would say that very few of my screenplays have been made. And then on the other hand, there's a credit arbitration process for whether your name gets on the film or not. And so there are other films that I've worked on quite extensively that I didn't get credit on. That's common. That's normal. That's normal in the business. It hurts, but it's normal.
You still get paid though, right?
Yes, but not as much. You don't get royalties. You only get royalties if your name's on it.
Yeah, interesting. I just have known some screenwriters who've made a handsome living writing all their lives and haven't had any films actually made.
Yeah. That's more common than you'd think. So, and it's frustrating because I don't know about you, but I have to fall in love with whatever I'm working on to want to work on it. And so you fall in love with these are all your children, even the children that have been really interfered with by many other people, they're still your children. And so when someone tells you that your children are not going to see the light of day, it always hurts. So you develop pretty thick scar tissue in the movie. As a writer in the movie business, you better develop pretty thick scar tissue, otherwise you're not going to survive. It's the rejection is constant, and the rejection and correction is constant. Something I haven't, something that writing this novel has changed in a beautiful way. I love working with an editor. I'm used to working with notes, but to actually get really incredibly good notes, that's wonderful. That make my book much better. Wonderful, love it.
I want to talk a whole lot about the process of adapting a novel, but before we move away, because I am devastated that this series is not going to come to be. But it's one thing when you're working with the studio fellows or people who want to give you notes. If Christopher McQuarrie has a note, well, he probably knows he wrote The Usual Suspects. He's pretty smart.
Yeah.
But when it's Bill Clinton, and you say, well, Mr. Clinton, I think we should, Mr. President, I think we should make this change. And he says, no. Is that more or less the end of the discussion?
No, but only because of him. He was incredibly generous and incredibly respectful, actually. And once he and Jim Patterson realized that we were that first of all, we're doing an adaptation, so some things had to change, which we'll get to, but that we were honoring the book and honoring its source. Then they felt comfortable enough to let us exercise our judgment, and I think they really liked what we came up with. So no, it's always a negotiation, even if it's not called that. But it's if you have basic human skills, which President Clinton does more than any other person I've ever met, then you can talk about these things honestly and openly and come to a decision on them. He was not autocratic in any way.
A temptation of mine, if I'm sitting across from a former president, is we talk about the book, we talk about all kinds of things, but sooner or later, when I feel the conversation is comfortable enough, I'm going to say, Mr. President, what do we know about the aliens? What were you informed of? Did you ever have that discussion?
No, I wanted to, because that's also an interest of mine. And so I did want to ask about Area 51 and so on, but no, I was being paid to keep my eye on one ball, you know. So, and he told us amazing stories because we needed to know how certain things worked. You know, the whole allure of the series was that it was going to be inside, and we had the ultimate insider to the White House, helping. So that's what I was digging for, is, you know, what are you wearing when you get the call on the red phone? You know, where were you? What's it like? You know, 2 a.m, dude. All of those things, you know. And he was super generous with his experience. He very seldom said, I can't talk about that.
Well, even without a TV series, that's a once in a lifetime experience. This kid you're going to carry forever, right?
It was amazing. It was amazing. He showed me a letter that was a gift to him, a letter from Albert Einstein about the potential practical applications of splitting the atom.
Wow.
Yes.
I bet even if you had a year or 2 years just to ask him every question that ever came to mind, there's no way you'd ever cover everything. I bet he's forgotten so many interesting things that have happened to him along the way.
He hasn't forgotten anything. He's amazing. He's amazing. He's amazing. So it was fun.
Got you. So I'm fascinated. You're exploring a remote, high altitude landscape with your children, and you come across a mountain made of black glass, and suddenly it clicks immediately that this is the foundation of a story. What happens when you encounter that mountain?
Well, this was on a road trip on the Eastern Sierras of California, right? And road trip with the family and the kids. And I emulated my father, and still do, and tell stories to my kids. And we were all into archaeology and ancient objects, and always tried to visit ancient sites wherever we went. And we knew that, because we'd read about it, we knew that an obsidian arrowhead from this place in the Eastern Sierra had been found 250 miles away in a sand dune on the coast near where we lived in California. And the kids went, how did that get there? And so I made up a story. Night after night, as we were traveling, it was embellished. And, you know, kids are ruthless. If you're boring them, they let you know. immediately. And so we just sort of started making up the story of how this arrowhead got from in the middle of nowhere at 10,000 feet to the coast. And at a certain point, the story kept, and it was a bedtime story, right? And so at a certain point, the story started keeping the kids awake rather than putting them to sleep. And my wife gently suggested that I stop telling the story and just write it down. And so I did at the time and put it in a drawer and forgot about it. Or didn't forget about it. It kept gestating. And sometimes it gestated consciously and other times unconsciously. And the giant trading city that my two protagonists end up in is modeled on medieval Timbuktu, because I went to an exhibit talking about this incredible city at the base of the Sahara Desert. And so the beautiful thing about fantasy is I get to go from the high Sierras to Timbuktu in one journey. And so stuff dropped into place. And then eventually during COVID, I was going nuts with nothing to do. The president is missing, was frozen. I didn't want to write screenplays because we didn't know when movies were going to be made. And so I pulled this out, and I had about 5 chapters, and I read them thinking they were going to be awful, which is often an experience I have anyway with old writing. I go, but I read it and went, this is not terrible. And so started again. It was terrible, but it was terrible with potential. And I started writing it again. No, it wasn't hopelessly terrible. And so started writing it again and wrote the entire novel sort of during the depths of COVID shutdown. Probably, and so I was only entertaining myself, which is a wonderful lesson. I didn't think of selling it. I didn't know that it was young adult. I love stories, Hatchet, Ender's Game are 2 books that I read again and again. And I don't consider those children's stories at all. They're stories about children, but the themes and the darkness of them is tremendous. And so I just kept trying to entertain myself with this story without thinking of a market, without thinking of anybody, but ending each day having had fun at my desk. And I wish I'd learned that lesson long ago, to just have fun, to have the confidence to have fun with what you're doing. And instead of seeing some invisible reader somewhere, or invisible critic, or invisible producer somewhere looking over your stuff. And so, as I said to you before, it's the most fun I've ever had writing in 30 years of professional writing.
I'm going to steal that phrase at every chance I get. This isn't bad. It's terrible with potential. That's fantastic. I think you wrote this down because now instead of keeping your children awake, children of the Black class can keep children around the world awake.
Hopefully. I've had a couple of people read it to their children, and it's not just children. So they've been reading it to their children and then confessing to me that after their child fell asleep, they just stayed there reading it until the end, which is the biggest compliment you could pay a writer. So hopefully I keep children awake all over the world, and children and not such children awake. I'd love to.
So when this idea comes to you, does it come as you're telling it to your children? At what point do you think this should be a novel and not a screenplay, or was it always going to be a novel?
Always going to be a novel. And I wrote it down as a novel. I hope it becomes a screenplay or a series, because I'm writing 3 books in this series. And I suppose at least, hopefully. But I'm writing 3 books in this series, and it would tickle me tremendously to sort of come full circle as a writer and adapt my own novel in some way. That would be fun. 2 very different things, very, very different hats. So I'd have to take off the novelist hat and put on the screenwriter hat and look at my own work as if it was a stranger's work, and as if I owed nothing to that stranger. Definitely owed something to the material, but I had to do to it what was necessary to make it into a film or a TV series. So I hope I get that opportunity.
Well, you certainly know a lot of the right people.
I do. I do. I mean, you know, I was very fortunate. I mean, writing's a mixture of luck and hard work, right? Getting published, I mean. And the luck I had was that I already had agents and a manager. They were movie agents and managers, but they all know book agents. So I showed this to them and they loved it. And they gave it to some book agents, and they loved it, luckily. It was great affirmation for a first novel. And so that was my fortune, is that I'd spent 30 years building up a network of people who were connected into the book world. So I jumped over a lot of the stuff you have to do to get to that place.
Oh, you didn't jump over
I
it.
didn't jump
30
over.
years building a shortcut.
Yeah, exactly. It was a long shortcut. And it only started because 30 years ago, when this professor of mine wanted to buy a screenplay, and it was, he gave me a price. I said yes, but I said, let's not do the deal. And I phoned around and said, there's this guy who wants to buy my screenplay. I don't know what to do about the deal. Do you want to help? And so that was a free 10% for an agent. So it was easy. It was easy to get an agent because I basically had done all the work for them. And all they had to do was pull out boilerplate, put in a few names, and they'd made themselves 10% of a very small deal. But it would seem like a fortune to me at the time. I was a graduate student. Yeah, 30 years of building that. And having people I really enjoy and respect as part of my movie. You have to have, I don't live anywhere near Hollywood anymore, so I have to have people who do, and who help me, help protect me, help open doors for me, and then I have to do my part after that. But so that's a wonderful thing to have. I'm very lucky in that respect.
Well, I've got lots of questions about the book. Before we get too far into it, it occurs to me that esteemed audience has probably not just read it, although they're probably pulling it up on the device that they're listening to us on and ordering their copy. Could you give us kind of an overview of the novel and what they need to know to make this informed purchase?
Yes, without wanting to give away any of the twists. It's a book set somewhere between the end of the Stone Age and the beginning of the Age of Metal. And it begins high up in the mountains in a village that is the only source of obsidian, black glass, in their entire land. And it starts the night before the men of the village are about to take their mules down to a giant trading city called Halfway, because it's halfway between everything in their land, to trade their seasons worth of black glass for the supplies to get them through winter, which is really harsh up there. And we focus on the father of a 14-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl named Tellen Wren, who blinds himself, carving the last and most precious piece of black glass. And so, breaking all the rules of their very rule-bound village, the two children decide to take their father's load of black glass down to halfway by themselves in order to get supplies for the season and get medicine for his eye. And that's against all the rules of their village. They risk expulsion, may not be allowed back. But down they go with their trusty mule Rumble. The journey down is incredibly dangerous. Many things happen, good and bad. And then they reach a city for which they are not equipped at all. Massive city, people from all over their land. They only know the route to the man who trades, the merchant who buys their black glass every season. And as they walk through the gates of this gigantic city, having had to shed their weapons, because there are no weapons allowed in the city, they walk into a coup. Not knowing what a coup is, they walk into a plot to take over the city. And basically, that's where I'm going to stop, because from then on, their world turns upside down. And they're incredibly tough because of where they live, incredibly resilient, very brave, very skilled teenagers who are up to the task of surviving this city and this coup. That's where I'll stop. There's much else to know and to read, but I don't want to give anything else away, because then you won't turn the pages if you already know.
Well, I'll be careful with my questions because I have a very bad habit of getting excited and talking about things we shouldn't yet for readers who haven't enjoyed. But something that happens extremely early that just fascinated me is the father character. It's a very traumatic scene that opens this novel. He's only got one eye, and then he blinds himself. And we know that he's got 30 days before they're going to put him on an iceberg with some wine or some
on
brand.
A glacier. They put him on a glacier with
a glacier.
Yeah.
So yeah, iceberg wouldn't make sense that high.
Up on the map. No. I mean, their existence is so precarious that if you get injured and don't heal within 30 days, you're taken out to the glacier above the village with a gourd of apricot brandy, and you sit with your friends and drink the brandy and fall asleep on the glacier and never wake up, and are slowly carried away. And so that is the sort of ticking clock of the whole story, is that Tell and Wren have to get back with medicine for their father before the 30 days is up. And so it's a harsh existence. This is, I think, a fairly dark book. A lot of bad things happen, but it's also about the resilience of these children and other people they meet of their own age, who are dragged into their adventure and who become great friends and allies and teachers, because Tell and Wren know nothing whatsoever about a city at all, and wouldn't survive a night without their new friends. So yeah, I'm hoping people are inspired by the courage and resilience of these kids. I certainly am. So, I have a 12-year-old son, so I want him to be resilient. I think our future is going to demand it. So So I'm hoping this models some of that for him. Not that he's read it, but he's about the only kid on the block who hasn't read it.
Well, it's going to, all of his friends are going to read it and talk to him about it. And eventually he's going to say, oh, what the heck? I'll sit down and I'll read this thing. And if you ask him about it, say it's fine, but probably you'll hear him talking to someone else and he will be as excited as they are.
Well, he says he only reads on his Kindle. So we're waiting for him to get it on his Kindle, even though I've just handed him a, first edition hardcover, and he's like, I can't read it in bed at night that way. So, which is where he does all his reading. So I don't care. He can read it any way he wants to, or not. So
Something it's not a trick. It's a craft technique you pulled off that I want to tease out. Is because you took me through a range of emotions very early. Because the father, I immediately pity him. Oh my God, you've lost your second eye. How are you going to survive in this world? And then you immediately take that pity that I have for him back because of the way he's treated the children's mother, because of some of the things he says to them, because of some of his outlook that's reflective of the values of the village. Like, oh no, I hate this man. But then immediately he sticks up for Tell. When he's dealing with a not so nice customer and helping him out, and you immediately win me back, and now I'm hoping that they're able to save him. It's just such a back and forth whiplash of how I feel about this character. How did you do it, and why?
Well, I mean, what happens? This is already a heightened circumstance, right? Up in this village, it's an extreme life. It's an extreme place, extreme people, and extreme life. And then what happens to this particular family is very dramatic and traumatic. And so I try to follow the, in the beginning, especially Tell's emotions through the trauma. They lose their mother. 2 years previously, she goes down the mountain with the trading party and never comes back, and no one will talk about her, and people pretend she never existed. And as a result of her not coming back, the women of the village are no longer able to go down, which they resent and hate. I do explore some of the issues with patriarchy here without ever using words like that. But so I take you into a family that's had a lot of stuff happen to them in a short period of time, and it keeps getting worse. And so that's where those emotions come from, and that whipsaw comes from. And then Tell's idea, which is revolutionary in their context, to do it himself without permission, is sort of very liberating, I thought. And the fact that his father not only blesses him, but gives him the confidence to do it is, I thought, wonderful. That this man Tell has hated for 2 years because he thinks he's somehow responsible for their mother's disappearance. That shell cracks in time for us to feel they're leaving behind someone they love and want to save, and the only parent who's still available to them. So I don't know. I think it's dramatic and kind of emotional.
Well, and of course, compounded by just the not knowing. As soon as they're asking what happened to mom, no, we're never talking about her again, and then that's it.
Right. She's an unperson in their village, which is awful. So I don't want to say anything more about that, though.
Well, of course, you're teasing a mystery that we're going to learn more about later, but that's for the reader to discover.
Yeah. But I'm glad you saw the emotion or felt the emotion and the range of emotions, of intense emotion.
Well, it was just such a very short. It was like within two, 3 chapters you did this. That I'm back and forth on this character. Like I don't know how to feel.
Well, there's more to him in book 2. He's a crucial character, even though the entire story is told from the point of view of the children. Of course, he's crucial to them, and anyway, I don't want to say anymore because it gives away other things that are best discovered in the course of the story.
Well, without getting into specifics, there are some very surprising twists and turns, and you've got 2 more books, so I'm assuming you've got more twists and turns saved up. How much are you plotting ahead to provide those, and how much of those are you pantsing until you get there and then working backward to make everything make sense afterward?
It's a good question because, and very much a difference between screenwriting and the novel, is I kind of know where I want the story to end up, but I don't really know how I'm going to get there. I know how my story begins. So every day I sit down and try and surprise myself. And for me anyway, it's the stuff it's the stuff I didn't anticipate that ends up being the best stuff every day. So it's sort of being open to being surprised as you're working while staying within the logic of the world you've created, right? So it's, I can't do it all the time and every day, but that's what I seek, is to surprise myself. And that's why, I sort of paint myself into a corner. How are they going to get out of this? How are they going to solve that problem? And try and make sure that the solutions come from them, not from the novelist, if you know what I mean. That they're not, I don't, suddenly they can't fly, to get out of trouble. It still has to stay within the logic of what I've established. And so more than once I've had to abandon a pathway because I couldn't figure out how to get back. It turned out to be a dead end for me creatively. And so I'd have to work back. And then as long as you accept that as part of the process, that some days you're going to throw stuff away that you've spent all day or all week or all month doing, then it doesn't feel too tragic to me to do that. It feels like just part of the process of writing the novel in a way that's going to be full of twists and turns and surprises and solutions that people will hopefully find entertaining, because I did. So that's the process.
I assume the flip side of that is if you're throwing so much at them that you don't know if they can get out of it or how they're going to get out of it ahead of time, then the reader can't rightly find this predictable because you don't know, right?
Right. And so when it works, it's wonderful, but it doesn't always work. And then like I said, you just have to accept that it's not always going to work. But I find that enjoyable, to get to the end of a day and go, oh, I didn't know they were going to be there by the end of the day is pretty cool. It keeps me entertained writing it, rather than, often with screenplays, you map every single beat out. I mean, you'll stand in front of a giant whiteboard in a producer's office and literally write down every single scene and what goes down in every single scene. And they have to do TV series that way. They have to have them mapped out. You can't do what I've just described in a TV series or even in a movie. And so, but that's kind of confining. Once everyone's gone, oh, that's wonderful, let's do that. That's what you have to do. That's what you're signed on for. And that's a discipline in itself. And I've really enjoyed not doing that discipline with the book, and will continue to not do that discipline. I'm in a terrible bind now with book 2. I don't know what I've got my people in a place where I don't know what I'm going to do. So hopefully I can figure it out.
Well, when you're writing during COVID, and now hopefully knock on every piece of the wood there is somewhere, if not past, somewhere in the middle of this pandemic that's forever going to be probably ongoing.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation. But when you're sitting down and you're writing, how are you looking for a certain word count? What's your work day look like, and how do you know if you've had a good day?
Um, I don't have a word count or a page count so much as I have a place in the story I want to get to. And I'm usually 2 to 5 pages a day, however many words that is. I've learned that in order to sustain constant writing, if you go too hard one day, there's nothing left the next day. At least that's for me, is that I can write myself out, and I don't like doing that. I'd rather just sort of do what I can do within basically 5 or 6 hours is all I've got for actually sitting in front of the computer. After that, I just wear out, and then it becomes a law of diminishing returns, and I usually throw away whatever's written then. There was an old a trick I learned. I used to read the letters of writers that I admired, particularly Ernest Hemingway and Raymond Chandler, because they were tremendous correspondents, and they talked a lot about how to write or how they wrote. And Hemingway had this fantastic piece of advice, which I give anyone. I mean, I'm known as a bore about this because I find it so useful. It's such a great writer's tool. He always said, stop before you're finished every day. So leave a paragraph you know what to do unwritten, because the next morning you don't have, that's your warm-up. You know exactly what you're going to write, and you can start writing it. And by the time you finish that paragraph, you're off for the next day. You're off and running for the next day. So, and so I always try and do that. I always try and stop while there's something left for me to write, and then I'll pick it up the next day. So that's that's a fantastic tool. And anyone who ever tries it comes back to me and offers to buy me a drink. So
Hemingway would approve.
Yeah, he would. No, naturally. And the other great piece of advice is from Raymond Chandler, and I use this, is that you have to go to your office, you have to sit down, you don't have to write, but you can't do anything else. You can't pay bills, you can't surf the internet. The computer I write on is not connected to the internet. I have my laptop for that. So when I write, I can't go look at sports scores or anything like that. And then you don't have to write, but eventually you get bored enough that you start writing just to entertain yourself. And I've found that a really great discipline is you have to sit there. Just have to. You can't. If you're trying to produce pages every day, you don't have the luxury of waiting for the muse to strike you. You just have to sit there and work, or do nothing else, and that's pretty wonderful. A wonderful advice as well. That lets you set up a rhythm, and you only have to do that once or twice in a project, and then you have the rhythm, and then you get Hemingway's dictum, of stopping before you've finished, and usually pretty soon you've got a pile of pages there. So that's we all have tricks, right? You have to trick yourself to do this. So we all have tricks for that. I assume everyone knows when their brains work best, or should know eventually, that what your perfect writing time is, and then you protect that time jealously. What I do, I mean, I basically write from 7 until 1 every day, 7 a.m. till 1 o'clock. that's my writing time. Nothing else can happen there. You better be bleeding if you want to come through the door. So that, and then after that, I'm useless. So I can go and do all the other stuff. Then if I'm really working hard, then I edit. But usually I prefer to edit the next morning. And you protect when your brain works best. I think you should.
Are you listening to music, or are you allowed anything that might help inspire you, but also possibly distract you?
No, because I love music, but I start singing and stuff, along with it. And so, no, I'm trying to hear the voices I'm writing, especially movies, you're writing dialogue, and I need to hear those voices. And that's transferred over to the novel too. I need to hear my characters talk. So I listen for that. And so it doesn't have to be dead silence, but I don't have music on in my office while I'm writing. But I know a lot of people do. And then I've learned that when you need to read a chunk to see if it's any good or not, I go somewhere else. I go out of the environment I wrote it in, get in a car, drive to a coffee shop 20 miles away. And it looks different there. When you sit down to read it, it looks different. You can read it more, I can read it more objectively. And that's a great little trick too.
Are you printing it up or reading it on a different device? Or are you taking the same computer?
Paper. I'm old school. I love paper because I make notes much more quickly with a pen, notes and corrections much more quickly with a pen. And ultimately, I'm going to want to, read it on paper. So I want to see how it looks. I think things look differently on paper than they do on a screen. I don't have a Kindle because I look at a screen all day. I don't want to read a book on a screen at night. So I only read books, book books, the object. Even though trees are sacrificed for it.
For a worthy cause.
Yeah, and I love the object. I love what books are as an object. That this small thing can contain huge worlds, and characters that shock you, and things happen, all within this little block of stuff. And so I love that.
Of course, if you're handwriting your notes, at some point you've got to go back and you've got to input those changes into the computer as opposed to doing it as you're thinking of the notes, which means they've got to be considered at least twice. So it's almost like another draft, right?
No, it is. And I like that part of it. And often, I've learned that to do sort of shorthand notes, sometimes I'll just, circle a paragraph and do CDB, could do better. And then I'll go back and attempt to do better. If something's been lazy, inadvertently, or the first choice, the creative first choice all the way down the line, when sometimes you shouldn't be doing that. So I've got shorthand for, I don't change every single word with a pen in the coffee shop.
Do you not resent yourself a little bit when you look, what am I supposed to do with this? Could do better. You should have done better.
I'll tell you what, I don't mind it when I do it. I learned that the hard way and from the other direction in Hollywood, right? And I hated the people who did that to me. I couldn't stand it. Could do better. You try and do better.
I've done that to myself before. I'll write a note, a really helpful note, like make this brilliant. Oh, great.
Yeah. Yeah. How? Yeah, exactly.
That's future me's problem. Just make it brilliant, future me.
Exactly. Kick the can down the road. But anyway, yeah. So, we just, screenwriters don't mix much with other screenwriters. We're all lonely people in little rooms for the most part, until you've got too many people telling you what to do and leaning all over your stuff. But most of the people I know who are writers and who I talk to, everyone has tricks that work on themselves. Or little things they do to make their work life more efficient. The one that is most horrible is the people who can't write until they're so close to deadline that they have to. It's a crisis. They can't write until there's a crisis. And I don't know. I think you lose years off your lifespan doing it that way.
Certainly sounds less pleasant.
Yeah, it is. I think so. But people do work that way.
And of course, when you're writing a screenplay, we were talking before we got started that you can't write down the character's internal monologue, what they're thinking. You don't spend a lot of time on scenery or any of that. You're just going to say interior, exterior, and then get to the dialogue. So what was the hardest part of transitioning for you to novel writing, and what was also maybe the most freeing part?
Well, I didn't think it was the hard part until my editor pointed it out, but a lot of my first draft was written in a fairly distant third-person voice, the way I've been trained to do as a screenwriter, where I can only show what people do and what they say in the setting they're in, and very briefly. And so it's emotionally distancing. When people first read a screenplay, they're difficult to read because you don't yet have the muscle to be watching the movie you're reading and anticipating what actors do, because the actors bring the emotion. So I had to be taught by my editor, basically, to get much closer to my characters and break all these rules that had been sacred to me for 30 years. And once I started doing it and got it, oh my goodness, it was so liberating. I loved it. I loved being able to talk about what was in their heads and in their hearts and in their bellies as things happened to them. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I don't think I went far enough. Maybe I did. I don't know. If you felt the emotions you were feeling at the beginning of the book, then I succeeded at some point, to some extent. But
felt emotions throughout. We're just not talking about the later book.
We can if you want, but it's just that the people who've read the book so far, they phone me and go, "You did not, I did not see that." And so I always loved that in a book, not knowing what was coming and being surprised. So anyway, but I'm just loving. I love my characters. I have a character in this book who is my favorite, and I never thought she would be. She just kind of grew, and I love her, and bad things happen to her too, and she survives them, not undamaged, and she's a character I absolutely love, who I never expected to. So that's a pleasure. It's just going, oh wait, this is such a rich character. I've got so much to do with her. She's now definitely one of my main characters, even though we always go back to Tell and Ren, and their relationship to each other and to the world. I love Rumi as well. So that's been part of the fun. It's just having characters grow and start to disobey you and start to not do what you thought they were going to do that day. Because when you get to write it, it's just wrong. It's just, no, she can't do that. She would never do that. So that's me trying to make a character do something. She would never do that. Then I know we've got a live character there. So that's pretty cool.
I'm of the opinion, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well, that when you torture your characters, bad things happen to them, and you you engineer terrible things to happen for them. I think that is a form of love because you're making their story more compelling. Like, yes, it's unfortunate for you at this moment, but trust me, in the long run, you're going to be a far more interesting character because these terrible things are happening to you.
Absolutely. And I've always loved those stories, of peril and peril and suffering, and make that characters making their way through that and growing their way through that. And so you're absolutely right. It is a form of love. If I didn't love them, I wouldn't bother. You wouldn't bother with all of that trouble. And life's that way, life's full of trouble. And you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I keep looking for the easy mode where you don't have to deal with the issues ever again. Doesn't seem to be an option.
I'm older than you, and I still haven't found it either. So I or at least when things happen easily, it's unusual enough that you note it, right? I think some people do go through life and everything happens easily. I'm thinking of one person who thinks that life's really easy, and it really has been really easy for them. But that's only one person out of all the people I know. Everyone else has a hard time at points.
Is it Matt Damon? No, I'm teasing.
No, no. I don't know if his life is easy or not. He's a good guy though. So
I'm curious when you're dealing with celebrities that we've all fallen in love with through different films. How do you stop yourself from, hey, Matt, how do you like them apples? Things that would not be appropriate to say. How do you maintain acknowledging that they are who they are? You're talking to Morgan Freeman. We all know that that's Red from Shawshank, but
yeah.
you want to distance yourself. How do you deal with them respectfully so you can work with them and take them off the pedestal that they are on through marketing?
You have to. It's not professional not to. And film is a collaborative medium, and they need me and I need them. And it's my greatest pleasure to write for a specific actor. I love it. I love working with an actor. And so you very quickly lose any kind of starstruckness once you start working together, doing proper work, moving words around, moving scenes around and stuff like that. Then you're just trying to make a better movie. And if hopefully you see eye to eye on how to do that, or at least you can talk through how to do that. And so yeah, it's not, I've never asked for an autograph or a picture, never would. It's not professional, and they would not. They'd lose respect for me instantly. So it's sort of easy. You just do your work. They do their work. You try and do the best you can.
When you're writing for a specific actor and you know their work and you know what some of their strong points have been previous, I imagine the temptation would be, I know you wrote a screenplay for Tobey Maguire. It would be my temptation to to work in Spider-Man references, but to think of the characters I've seen him play. But if you're creating a whole new character and they're an actor with incredible range like Tobey Maguire has, how do you put that in a separate part of your brain and create something entirely new that they're still going to play to their strengths, but it's not going to be a paint by numbers caricature for them?
Well, actually, the last thing they ever want is to do what they've done before. So some people do because it's easy and comfortable for them, and they repeat themselves, and that's fine. If people like that, that's fine. But someone like Tobey would never want to be what he'd been before. And so I just focus on the character I'm writing, and Tobey will decide how to play that. That's what actors do, and good actors. And so really I'm trying to write a character that intrigues Tobey. because it's different from anything else he's done. So I never ever go back and look at an actor's previous work to try and inform my work. Quite the opposite. I try and forget everything they've ever done, because they are who they are. I mean, they aren't acting. Good acting is very difficult because people have to put on a different character every time they do that. I think it's kind of quite hard psychologically if they really get deep into who they're trying to be. And so my job as the writer is to provide them the material to do that with, rather than try and, as I said, try and repeat what they've already done. And then it's a collaboration as you work together. They'll say, I can't say it this way. There's nothing more detailed than nobody is more detailed than an actor working through his or her lines with you just before production. They really push and pull on everything. And, I'm the writer. I think I know what I've got on the page. And once the actors start pushing and pulling on it, the good, smart actors, you realize, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or that line can't work. And sometimes the way they deliver a line completely changes the meaning of the line. And just the emphasis, different emphasis on the words. And so then you change the script to reflect them as an actor. It's really exciting. It's hard work. It's not me having ideas anymore. It's me working with the actor to put what they want to do on the page, while still keeping the scenes and the stories in place. It's very cool. It's fun. It's exhausting. It's sort of guerrilla warfare. It's like guerrilla writing, because it's all happening in real time. There's a start date. You're out of time. My brain turns to mush after 5 or 6 hours. Sometimes people can go for 12 hours, and I just can't. That sometimes the actors can go all day, 8 to 8, and I just can't. At a certain point, I just have to say uncle and go take a walk or something, and or a nap, and try and rehabilitate my brain. But yeah, it's fun. That part's really fun.
Do you miss that tool, and how do you compensate for that when it's you playing all of these characters? Yeah.
I don't miss it. It's because usually it means I'm away from my family in a hotel room somewhere. When I've come to not enjoy being alone in hotel rooms, and writing the novel means that that's me. I'm acting every character. I'm while trying to make it not sound like me in every piece of dialogue. So I haven't missed it yet. Let's put it that way. I'd love to do it again, but I haven't missed it yet. I'd love to do it again with the actors who are playing the characters in this book that I will hopefully have adapted for a movie or a TV series. That would be fun, to go down that journey with the actors, see where that leads us. So that would be fun and very satisfying.
I assume that, having worked so closely with some of the greatest actors that have ever lived, you've picked up some tips and tricks about how to create characters and how to refine dialogue along the way. Yeah.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so. I try not to think too much when I'm writing. I try to not paralyze myself with conscious thought, or at least technical thought on this stuff. But yes, I hope I have. I did a lot of work and a lot of work on the set of the Book of Eli. And Gary Oldman plays the bad guy in the movie. And he just phones me one day and goes, Tony, do I shave? Because it's post-apocalyptic, right? But he's the boss of the bad gang. And I say, I had never thought of it. And you go, yes, but you're the only person in this entire movie who shaves. No one else has a razor or soap or anything. You're the only person who can shave. So yes, you shave. And he's like, thank you. I thought so. Yes. And that's that. You know, he was the one who brought that question to the character. But it's quite important on screen, right? Or it's quite important to know that he's the wealthiest person in that world where there is no wealth anymore. So that was.
Now I'm incredibly jealous. I've always joked that they could save a lot of money making Jurassic Park movies if they just cast Gary Oldman to play all the dinosaurs. At first, you go, I don't know if but he would do it. He'd pull it off. He so disappears into real life. I think that's a T-Rex. It's not Gary Oldman anymore.
And he'd be a bloody scary dinosaur too.
Far more scary than a CGI.
Yeah. Yeah. He's amazing.
Tony, I'm watching our time, and it's flown by. You've been very generous, and I've so enjoyed our conversation. I've got two more questions for you, and we'll think about landing this thing.
Okay. Yep.
The esteemed audience knows I have to ask, and you mentioned you have an interest in flying saucers and aliens, and I ask everybody who comes on the show, Tony Peckham, have you ever seen a ghost and or a flying saucer?
I have felt a ghost.
Go on.
Or a spirit. I don't want to get too deeply in because it's personal and somewhat painful, but a person close to me who had recently died came to me and spoke to me, and from the other side. And so yes, I do believe in. If that's a ghost, then I do believe in that. I think that in Celtic mythology, it's called the thin place, right? It's just there. It's just there. And I do believe that in that. So yes. And I don't know if there was another part of the question.
Oh, just have you ever seen a flying saucer? Where do you feel now that we're shooting down unidentified flying objects all over the place? Where do you think we're at with this whole? How close are we to getting to know what the secret is behind these things?
I don't think we're close at all, but I know enough people who I trust in all other aspects of their life. Not crazy, functional. Functional, honest people who have seen flying saucers or have seen objects that behave aerodynamically in a way that nothing we make can. And so again, there's something there. It's absurd to think that we're all there is. I mean, I always go back to that. Where I live, I lie on my driveway when it's a clear night because where I live is very dark, and you can see deep into the Milky Way, and it really is milky. If it's dark enough, it's a milky stripe in the sky. And to think that we're all there is in all of that doesn't make sense to me. So
what's the line from Contact? It seems like an awful waste of space.
Yeah, exactly. Contact's a great film. All right, and you said you had other questions.
I did. I like to end on this question, and that is, if you could go back to the start of your career, middle of your career, wherever it would have been most useful to you, and give yourself some advice that would have made a crucial difference for you, made easier your path, and might make easier the path of everybody who's watching or listening to us, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Oh, my goodness. Well, there's a list, but the top of the list I would have been much more successful if I knew these things. The top of the list, and really writing this book brought this to me in a very visceral way, is write for yourself. Write to please yourself. Do stuff that you think is good. Don't write for anyone else. If you make yourself happy, chances are you're going to make, or entertain yourself or frighten yourself, the chances are you're going to do the same for others. Be confident enough in what you do to write for yourself. That's please yourself. I wish I'd been able to do that much earlier in my career, rather than pleasing a producer or a director or a studio executive. To have the confidence to please myself and know that they would that would generally please others. So that's the advice I have for myself and everyone else. Entertain yourself.
When did you learn that lesson, and how did you learn it? Follow-up question.
Just in the movie business, getting pissed off enough at, I probably can't use that word, getting upset enough at continually being corrected by people who didn't read, didn't write, didn't necessarily deserve the jobs they had. But I still sort of neurotically listened to them. And at a certain point I went, why am I listening to these people? I know better. I'm the writer. I know better. I know how these things work. I know my craft. And so at a certain point in my screenwriting career, that happened, and the difference was immediate. And then writing this book, I really wrote it for myself. And I enjoyed every moment of it. And so hopefully others do too. And I have to repeat that trick with the second one, is write it just for myself, even though now there are other people waiting for it. So write for yourself.
And that's why it's so truly excellent. Children of the Black Glass is available now. Tony, where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
Nowhere. I'm sorry to say, at Simon and Schuster and in the Google sphere, I guess I'm there. Apparently I am, and but no, I have enough trouble managing myself in the world I'm in, the little old world I'm in of pens and pencils and computers and stuff. So I don't have time. And, I have a family and a child to raise, and I just don't have time to sit on a screen and have a screen presence like that, a social media presence. So I'm sorry to say the book is where you'll find me.
So when people fall in love with the story, they can post a review on all the usual sites. They can send a letter care of Simon and Schuster to let you know how much they enjoyed it.
Yes, please. I love letters. Letters are, I'm sorry, letters are gone, pretty much. Because writing a letter is an act, right, that you have to do. So yes, you can. Care of Simon and Schuster. Athenaeum Publishing is the branch within Simon and Schuster. It's all there in the frontispiece. So,
as always, esteemed audience, for more interviews almost as good as this one, head to middlegradeninja.com. Get your copy of Rob Worm's Bird Adventure. You're going to love it. For God's sake, get your copy of Children of the Black Glass. Get both. What a weekend you're going to have ahead of you. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.